If you came across this podcast, you may have typed in, "Do you know him?" If so, who or what are you looking for in life? If you'd like to talk to someone about this, or if there is something you'd like to hear about in a future episode, then please email us at doyouknowhimpodcast@gmail.com. And now on to today's episode.
Welcome to the Do You Know Him podcast. My name is Lowell King and I'll be your host. Today's episode is entitled Memories. Memories are something that we all have. Some are good and some are bad. They're neatly sealed up and deposited in our minds and soul. They're there for safekeeping, and they're available to be recalled for our joy and pleasure. Of course, there are those times when the bad memories stick up their ugly heads and remind us of some mistake we made or some outburst of anger or words that we shouldn't have said, some bad decision that we made. It's easy to identify these bad memories as our enemies and our good memories as our friends. But is this really the truth? While it's not much fun to recall the bad memories that we've had, maybe we should re-examine the bad memories and remember that they really are our friends as well. Bad memories can help us to avoid making the same mistakes or bad decisions that we seem to have made in the past. For this podcast, I want to focus primarily on the good memories. So what is the source of memories? First of all, let's take a look at that. First, we have memories of words. Memories can be words like "I love you." It can be shared between a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife. It can be even an expression of love towards God. It can be a word of encouragement that a person might receive from a teacher or a coach or even a friend or a parent. Something that will help a person achieve a goal, to spur them on to something greater than maybe they thought they were able to achieve on their own. It can be things that we've seen, such as maybe seeing the Grand Canyon for the first time, or standing in the awe of the power of Niagara Falls. It could be a simple thing like being out on a lake and watching a bird, an eagle, swoop down on a lake and retrieve its next meal. If we think about it, there's so many things that impress our memories that we've seen and we've heard, but there's really more. You know, we're very fortunate that we live in a time when we have our cell phones. We can capture the moment of a picture or video. And we kind of take for granted the power that we hold in our hands. I remember when I was younger, there were no cell phones, and we never had that capability. We would have to take a picture and wait for 3 or 4 days before we got to see what the picture revealed and how it turned out. But today we have that ability to capture the moment, which is unbelievable. I can't help but wonder what it would have been like if there had been cell phones with cameras at the time of Moses. If you can imagine the parting of the Red Sea, all captured on cell phones, or possibly Jesus walking on water, or doing one of the many miracles that he performed. Of course, at that time, we'd have to listen to the critics, if they did have cell phones in those days, saying that the photos were photoshopped, or the miracles were special effects that had been created to look like it was real, but it wasn't real. But the reality is, as we all know, those things really did happen. Memories can be things like what we've learned, and that can be good and bad too. It can be a simple thing of what we learned in school, what we learned in our jobs, but there's negative experiences too, and it can be anything from food to relationships. I know some people say they don't like a particular vegetable, for example, and they're when you ask them why don't you like this vegetable, they simply say they don't know. They just can't remember, but they don't like them. Uh, there's nothing more important than the things that we've learned in the Bible, in my opinion, the promises that God have made that we can claim to be our own if we're children of Him. Uh, God's promises are the only thing that gives us comfort and assurance when the world is falling apart all around us. And of course, the things God has done in our lives, uh, we should never forget. These memories can be brought back and be shared with other people, or they can be an encouragement to us. There's also things that we can that contribute to our memory, such as objects, such as maybe a rock or a shell that was discovered on some special place or some time when you were out with a special person. It can be an old T-shirt that you purchased while on vacation on maybe that one special place that you'd never gone to before and maybe never gone again, but you hang onto that T-shirt to remind you of the great experience you had on that vacation. Our memories also include things like answered prayer, the moment of divine intervention in our life, the miracles that are unexplainable by science or human intellect. Uh, these are things that should never leave our memory. They should be etched in our memory so that we can recall that again for strength and comfort, knowing that God really does care and He really has His hand on our lives. The question, I guess, is what do we do with these memories? Uh, Obviously, there are personal memories, they belong to us, uh, and they do help us and convict us and comfort us in many ways. The question is, do we have a responsibility to share these memories with other people? And if we choose not to share the memories of God's faithfulness, uh, shouldn't we ask ourselves why? When Jesus came, He counted on those uh, who He had personal contact with to share the memories that they experienced. He sent them out and to tell others. And He said, if no one tells them, how will they know and how will they believe? Well, I remember years ago, uh, we were going to Newark Community Church when we lived in that area. And our Pastor Ed Moore, one morning asked the whole congregation to raise their hands if they had any interaction and they knew their grandparents. Well, virtually everybody raised their hand. Uh, I think there may have been a couple of people that didn't, but I'd say almost every single person did. Then he asked, how many of you had an interaction and know your great grandparents? And only about 6 or 7 people raised their hand. And then his third question was, how many of you know the names and where your great grandparents lived and what they did for a living? And no one raised their hand. They didn't even know the names of their great grandparents. And so he challenged us at that time that we should sit down and we should write out something about our lives to share about what we did, where we lived, what something about our families, maybe something about our parents, so that can be passed on to future generations, and other generations would know something about us. And of course, he also suggested that we share maybe within that letter or journal or however you wanted to communicate it, some of the amazing experiences that God had performed in our lives. And of course, something about our relationship with God. Well, if we don't share how we demonstrated God's hand of protection, if we don't provide stories about how he gave us direction and guidance, and how he provided for our needs at times when we never knew where the money was going to be coming from. Uh, we must ask ourselves, are we letting Satan manipulate us and silence us? Is he appealing to our pride and ego that we're uh, afraid to share with others the truth of how real God is? Uh, are we afraid that other people will think we're crazy? Uh, my gosh, there's literally hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people across this world who believe the same things that we do, and God is doing these amazing things in their lives as well. And so it seems to me, and that's what part of this podcast is about, is sharing these moments when God has been faithful. And if we don't do this, if we don't open up and share with others, how will they be encouraged? How will they know the truth about who God really is? Randy Travis sang a song called Three Wooden Crosses. And I'm reminded by a line from that song. Part of the lyrics of the song says, "I guess it's not what you take when you leave this world behind you, it's what you leave behind when you go." And I guess that's kind of like what Pastor Ed was suggesting, is that we would be able to, leave some kind of document or recording or video or whatever means. Now, today we have so many options of the things that happened in our lives, something that can be passed along to future generations. Uh, I think that's really an important thing that we need to consider. I wrote my second book about these experiences that God has done in my life, but unfortunately, as time has gone on, for whatever reason, I just have not been able to finish the editing of the book. And so I decided that after an experience that I had on July the 24th of 2018, uh, it triggered a mechanism inside of me. And I decided that rather than try to finish the book, and I will someday, I hope, but I decided that I would share these stories in these podcasts. Uh, Going back to July the 24th, 2018, my old and dear friend Troy Murphy passed away. Without warning, I might add, and without any notice. I guess we all think life will end at some point, but surely not today. And I think in the mind of every single one of us, we just don't think it's going to happen at this moment. It did for Troy. It happened instantaneously, without warning, and it leaves us all with questions when someone passes away like that. Uh, I should explain something about Troy and I. We've been friends for 40 years or more. We were, it was a special relationship, and for many reasons, but we played fast pitch softball together for 15 years, and he was my catcher, and I pitched during that period of time. And if you've never played baseball or fast pitch softball, you probably wouldn't understand the relationship between a pitcher and catcher. But the bottom line is that the pitcher has a skill to throw the ball, hopefully in the right place and the right speed. But the catcher is the brains of the operation. He's the guy who sizes up the batter, has a mental memory of the kind of pitches that a batter may not be able to hit. And it's his job to try to develop a strategy to get the batter to either strike out or pop up the ball or maybe hit a ground ball and get them out. Uh, Troy and I had that very special relationship, but we also had a special relationship off the field. Uh, we were close friends and we did a lot of things. We had many, many, many conversations, many of which did center around softball, but the reality is it went way beyond that. Troy was a Christian, and he lived life like a Christian. He was an example in front of me, and he wasn't perfect by any means. None of us are, but he was my mentor. And after I became a Christian, Troy told me that he and his wife Sarah had never given up on me, and that they had continued to pray for me even in my darkest times to become a Christian. And when it happened, it was an answer to prayer, I'm sure, in their mind. After my first son, Ralph, when my second son was born, before being born, actually, my wife and I had talked about, my wife Cecilia and I talked about what we should do about naming our second son. And I mentioned to her how much of an influence Troy had been on me and Sarah. And we got together and we decided that we would name the boy Troy after Troy Daniel Murphy, my good friend. And if the baby was a girl, we would name her Sarah after his wife, Sarah. And we did. So we decided when the baby was born, a boy, we decided to name him Troy David King after Troy Daniel Murphy. Well, after the death, Sarah and the kids approached me, and they gave me one of the greatest honors I think I've ever experienced in my life. They asked me if I would do the service for Troy. And I had that opportunity to think back and remember all of the great times we had, all the good influences that he was able to have on me. And truly, he was a man who walked the walk and talked the talk, as they say. He was an example, not only for me, but for so many people. I was able to share my thoughts and my heart about the man, Troy Murphy. And I'm really pleased and glad that God gave me the opportunity and his family gave me that opportunity to be able to share the things that Troy and I had experienced. The fact of the matter is that, Troy, his death was very, very quick and over. There was no time to think about anything, no time to talk about things that weren't finished in discussions. There was no time to say sorry for something that may have happened. I don't think anything like that were to have happened with him, but the reality is when someone has a quick death like that, there's just a lot of things you can't help but think, Josh, I wish I could have one more conversation with him. But that was not God's plan for Troy. And I know that with Troy and Sarah, that I'm sure over the years that they had shared the different things that God had done in their life, the amazing miracles that God had done. I know my wife and I have done that, but the one thing that concerned me as I thought about my own self, not so much with Troy, was the fact that I have this knowledge of these things that God has done in my life, that I just believe that somewhere or another I can't just die, and I will someday, taking this information and knowledge about who God really is and how much he loves everybody and how much he has his hand on our life and how he protects us and guides us and gives us direction. I just can't take that with me when I die. And I'm appealing to anyone that might hear this podcast to feel the same way. We need to share the truth of who Jesus Christ is and the things he's done in our life. So, if that rings some kind of an alarm in your mind and heart, I believe that maybe that's the reason God has directed you to this podcast. And I hope you will take note of Randy Travis's comment in his song, or his words, again, when he said, I guess it's not what you take when you leave this world behind you, it's what you leave behind when you go. So maybe we can all think about that and think about the things that God would have us do that will bring glory to him. Thank you for joining me today. This is Lowell King asking you probably the most important question anyone will ever ask you in your entire lifetime. Do you know him?